In the shadows of legality, a new kind of firearm is emerging. Untraceable, unassembled, and unregulated. These ghost guns are bypassing decades of gun control legislation, posing a complex challenge to law enforcement and policymakers across the nation. But how did we arrive at this point, and what does it mean for the future of firearm regulation in America? To understand the ghost gun phenomenon, we must first look at the historical tapestry of gun control in the United States. The Second Amendment, ratified in 1791, guarantees the right of the people to keep and bear arms. However, the interpretation and application of this amendment have been a constant source of legal and social debate since its inception. Early gun control measures in America were often reactive, stemming from the need for public order and the realities of frontier life. In 1934, the National Firearms Act, NFA, was passed in response to organized crime and the rise of automatic weapons, imposing taxes and registration requirements on specific types of firearms like machine guns and short-barreled rifles. Decades later, in 1968, the Gun Control Act, GCA, was enacted following the assassinations of President John F. Kennedy, Senator Robert F. Kennedy, and Martin Luther King Jr. This landmark legislation prohibited interstate firearms sales and expanded regulations on firearms manufacturing and sales to convicted felons. The technological evolution of firearms has always outpaced regulation. From the muzzle-loading flintlocks of the 18th century to the repeating rifles of the Civil War, each innovation brought new challenges. The late 20th and early 21st centuries have witnessed an even more rapid transformation, driven by digital manufacturing and the Internet. The critical turning point towards ghost guns began with the rise of the Internet and the digital age. In 2013, Cody Wilson, a law student and activist, founded Defense Distributed, a non-profit organization focused on the open-source proliferation of digital firearm blueprints. His goal was to make firearm manufacturing accessible to anyone with a printer. Wilson's organization released the first widely available 3D printable gun design, the Liberator pistol, in May 2013. This single-shot, 3D printed handgun was made primarily from ABS plastic and required a metal firing pin, which could be sourced from common hardware stores. The release sent shockwaves through the gun control advocacy community. The legal battles that ensued were immediate and intense. The state of New Jersey filed a lawsuit against Defense Distributed, seeking to block the release of the blueprints. While initially successful, the case eventually reached federal courts, highlighting the complex jurisdictional and constitutional questions at play. A significant development came in 2018 when the U.S. Department of Justice, under the Trump administration, reversed a previous policy. They announced that unfinished frames and receivers for firearms, which can be purchased without serial numbers and then completed by the end user, would be regulated under the GCA. However, the definition of unfinished became a point of contention. This policy shift acknowledged that components like the AR-15 receiver, often sold in an 80% complete state, could be legally acquired and then finished at home, effectively creating an untraceable firearm. An 80% receiver is a firearm frame or receiver that has not yet been machined to its final form and functionality. The user must machine the final 20% of the part themselves. The Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms and Explosives, ATF, has been at the forefront of trying to regulate these weapons. However, the legal definition of a firearm often hinges on whether the item is readily convertible into a functional weapon. Unfinished frames and receivers, by their very nature, are not yet considered firearms by the ATF until they are completed. The Internet has become the primary distribution channel for ghost gun components and blueprints. Websites openly sell unfinished receivers, jigs, and tools necessary for home assembly. These sales often occur without background checks, a critical element in traditional firearm purchases aimed at preventing prohibited individuals from acquiring guns. Law enforcement agencies have increasingly encountered ghost guns at crime scenes. In 2021 alone, the ATF reported recovering over 19,000 firearms that were suspected to be ghost guns. This number represents a nearly 15-fold increase from 2016, highlighting the rapid proliferation of these weapons.
The debate intensifies when considering the Second Amendment.
Proponents of ghost guns argue that the ability to manufacture one's own firearm is a fundamental right, protected by the Second Amendment, and that individuals should not be penalized for utilizing modern technology to exercise this right.
Conversely, gun control advocates emphasize public safety.
They argue that untraceable firearms facilitate criminal activity, making it impossible to track the origin of weapons used in violence and undermining the effectiveness of existing gun laws. They point to instances where ghost guns have been used in mass shootings and other violent crimes. In October 2021, the Biden-Harris administration announced new proposed rules aimed at regulating ghost guns. These rules sought to define firearm more broadly to include unfinished frames and receivers, requiring them to be serialized and subject to background checks when sold by licensed dealers. These proposed regulations faced immediate backlash from gun rights organizations, who argued that they would unfairly burden law-abiding citizens and infringe upon their Second Amendment rights. The legal challenges to these regulations are ongoing, reflecting the deep divisions in American society regarding firearms.
The technological frontier continues to evolve.
Advancements in nanotechnology and more sophisticated 3D printing technologies could lead to even more accessible and concealable untraceable firearms in the future, posing new challenges for regulators. The legal landscape surrounding ghost guns is a complex interplay of constitutional rights, technological innovation, and public safety concerns.
The courts continue to grapple with defining the boundaries of firearm regulation in the digital age.
One significant legal ruling came in July 2022, when U.S. District Judge Reed O'Connor in Texas issued a nationwide injunction against the ATF's rule requiring serial numbers on unfinished frames and receivers. He argued that the ATF exceeded its statutory authority and that the rule violated the Second Amendment. This ruling was a temporary victory for gun rights advocates, but the legal battles are far from over. The Department of Justice vowed to appeal, and the future of federal regulation on ghost guns remains uncertain, subject to further litigation and potential legislative action. The ability to manufacture firearms at home, utilizing readily available materials and digital designs, represents a fundamental shift in the accessibility of weapons. This technological leap challenges the traditional methods of tracking and controlling firearms. The debate also touches upon the historical context of firearm ownership. For centuries, the ability to defend oneself and one's property was paramount, especially in areas with limited government presence. The concept of self-reliance in armament has deep roots in American history. However, the scale and nature of violence in modern society, coupled with the ease of access to advanced weaponry, present a stark contrast to those historical precedents. The question remains, how can society balance the rights of individuals with the collective need for safety? The proliferation of ghost guns is not merely a legal or technological issue, it's a societal one. It forces a re-examination of what it means to regulate firearms in an era where manufacturing is increasingly decentralized and accessible. As technology continues to advance, the lines between regulated firearms and unregulated components will likely become even more blurred. The challenge for policymakers and law enforcement will be to adapt and find effective solutions that uphold both constitutional rights and public safety. The history of firearms regulation in America is a story of constant adaptation, from the musket to the machine gun, and now to the ghost gun. Each technological leap has necessitated a reassessment of the law. The ghost gun represents a critical inflection point in this ongoing narrative. Its existence challenges the very framework of firearm control, forcing a national conversation about the future of gun rights and responsibilities in the 21st century. What legal precedents will be set in the coming years? And can ghost guns fundamentally alter the balance of power between the individual and the state? Join us next time as we explore the escalating legal battles and potential legislative futures that will define the era of untraceable firearms.